So let's start off from where we left. So we were looking at money market and money market instruments, and we were going through the calculations last week. So we finished up commercial paper calculations, and we are going to start with the repo and then finish off with the certificate of deposit, and then we'll move on to the next lesson. Repurchase agreement. Consider a 90-day repo transaction with a repo rate of 4.75. A 180-day treasury bill with a rate of discount of 5% and a face value of 10 million is used as collateral. Assume that the haircut is equal to 10%. First question is, what is the amount of a repo loan? What have you invested in the repo? Okay. Now, for you to know the repo amount first, what are you going to do? They have given you the details of the collateral. The details of the collateral are the highlighted line. That is purely giving you the details of the security. Okay. And then they have given you merely the 10% haircut. Okay. If they have given you the full repayment amount, then you could do a backward calculation based on your repo rate and got the repo amount. Okay. Now they have given you the haircut. So what strategy are you going to use? First, you're going to calculate the market value of the security and then apply the 10% haircut and find the amount of the repo loan, which is essentially the amount that you have invested in the repo. So first, you have to calculate the market value of the security. What is the market value of the security? Price of the treasury bill. Okay. So price of the treasury bill, how can you find? They have given you the discount rate here. So simply discount rate is the annualized rate. Find the 1-day discount rate. Get the 180-day discount rate by multiplying that by 180 days. Then you simply multiply that by the face value. You will get the discount in amount terms. Deduct them from the face value and you will get the price of the treasury bill as 9.75 million. So this is the first, we have to filter out the details. As I have always told you, from the question you filter this entire section, then you can figure out what pieces of information you have and what pieces you don't. So they have given you certain details regarding the repo, most of the details regarding the collateral, and then the haircut percentage. So first question was find the amount invested in the repo. So step 1 is finding the market price. So how have you done it? Now this was the, I'll do the elaborate calculation for you. So one way that you could do is, you know the discount rate divided by 360 and then you get the per day discount in amount, in rate. Okay. Then what do? You calculate the 180-day discount percentage. So this 1-day discount percent into the 180 days will get you the discount rate for the exact 180 days. Okay, now you've got it. Now it's a matter of finding the discount in amount terms. So how are you going to do that? You can simply multiply your face value with the 182-day discount rate, which is 2.5. 5% is the annualized one. Okay. Now this is the 182-day discount rate, which is 2.5. That will give you the discount in amount terms as 250,000. So if your discount is 250,000, what is the price that you have to pay to buy this security today? 10 million minus 2,50,000 will get you the amount, which is 9,079.75 million. So first you calculate the per day discount rate, which would be this. Then you calculate the 180-day discount rate, which is this. Sorry. And then you calculate the discount in amount terms by simply multiplying this amount, the 180-day discount rate, by the face value. You will get your discount in amount terms. And then you arrive at the market price, which is essentially the price of this treasury bill. Okay. Is that it? Is that the final answer? No, they're asking you the amount that you invested. Okay, the price, the market price of the collateral is 9.75 million. But there needs to be a 10% haircut. So 10% of it has to be kept as a buffer, which means out of 9.75 million, 10% has to be kept aside as a buffer for the lender. So what is the amount that he is willing to give? Setting aside the buffer, you will arrive at 8,775,000 as the amount that is being invested in the repo. You can say it as amount invested in the repo or amount lent in a repo. Okay. So there we have got the answer. What is the amount of repo loan repayment in the transaction? Now they are asking, okay, this is your repo loan amount. On repayment, how much are you going to give? Okay, on repayment, how much are you going to settle back? So what is the repo principal? That's the amount that you borrowed. To this, you will have to add your interest component. So now we know the repo principal, which is 8,775,000. Okay. Then you multiply it by, or you will add your interest to it. How do you calculate your interest? Simply, this is the add-on interest method. So you take your principal 8.775 million, multiply that by your repo rate. This is the repo rate given in annual term, but your arrangement is only for 90 days. Now, so many students, what they do is they get confused. They use 180. Remember, 180 belongs to the details of the collateral. The repo transaction is only for 90 days. Okay. So, repo transaction term is what's important here. You use the term of the repo, which is 90, and then you divide it by 365. Now, so many students have this question. Why it's 365 here, even though we use a government security? Remember, this arrangement, the repo arrangement, is different from the treasury bill issue. Treasury bill issue is 364. In a repo arrangement, it can go throughout the year, which is essentially 365 days. That's why we have used 365 here. Your thinking of the collateral has to stop. Thinking of your treasury bill has to stop right after you calculate the market value of the security. After that, all the calculation that you do, you have to do it thinking that this is not the treasury bill, this is the repo that you're doing. Okay. So here in the repo, it's 365-day count. So simply your principal into the repo rate into 90 days divided by 365 will get you your interest rate. Now, ideally, your interest in amount terms. So your interest in amount terms is very, very visible here. It's only around 2,776. When you add that to your repo principal, your amount of repo loan repayment, which means on maturity, how much are you going to pay back? It's going to be 8,877,776 rupees. Sorry, it's 1 lakh, sorry, 100 and 1 lakh 2,000 odd amount. So here you can see how we have calculated the face value multiplied by the repo rate, multiplied by 90 days and divided by 365 will get you the interest amount as 100,000, 102,775.68 with a total repo repayment of close to 8.8 million. Okay, that's how the repo calculation works. Then we move to certificate of deposit. We learned that in certificate of deposits, there are two features. In the primary market, it's an add-on rate, but in the secondary market, it's a discount pricing method. Okay. Usually the questions that you get here are on the yield terms. How much is the yield that the person is receiving? Okay. So here simply an investor purchased a negotiable certificate of deposit a year ago in a secondary market. Okay, it is redeemed today upon maturity and he receives 1 million, which includes 40,000 as interest. What is the investor's annualized yield? Now we know yield meaning return divided by the investment into the days remaining, the day count. Here it's a 1 year, because here you can see 1 year ago you bought and today it's maturing. So 365 into 365, so that will evidently be 1. Okay. But here, what is tricky is you know your return from the interest. Okay. But you don't know whether there is any return from the capital gain side. Okay. There is nothing for you to talk of that. Okay. It doesn't essentially tell you about that. So you take your return, what they have given in the calculation of 40,000. What is the amount or the price that you paid to buy that? They have not given that detail as well. Then what do? You essentially assume that you paid the entire capital amount 1 year ago. Okay, 1 year ago you entirely paid the capital amount of that certificate of deposit to get this product. So on maturity, you have got 1 million including the 40,000 interest, which means the principal amount of investment is 960,000. 1 million minus the 40. You assume you paid the entire principal amount as your price in the secondary market. So your yield will be 40 divided by 960,000, getting you 4.167% as your annualized yield rate. Now this same question, I'm going to tweak it a bit. I'm going to do two adjustments where I'm going to say receives 1 million, excluding 40,000 as interest, or 1 million and an additional 40,000 as interest. And I'm going to give you that in the secondary market, you purchased this for 970,000. Okay. I'm going to tweak that same question here for you. I'm going to give you a price in which you bought it, and I'm going to separate the amount that you received. You have received 1 million and you have received 40,000 as interest. Now, what is your investment? That is the question. So first we know yield meaning you should know what is the yield formula. Yield formula will go as what is your return divided by your investment in it. This is simply the yield formula. Okay. Now, in this calculation, what is your return? On maturity, how much are you getting? On maturity, you are getting 1 million plus a 40,000. Okay. What is the price that you paid? You have paid 970,000. What is the return that you got? The return that you got here is 1,040,000 minus 970. Now this 70,000 includes 40,000, which is the add-on interest rate of the certificate of deposit, and another 30,000, which is coming from the discount. Now if you see, on maturity, you have received 1 million, which would mean that 1 million is the principal amount. Okay, and you have got the 40,000 as interest. But for this 1 million principal amount in the secondary market, you paid 970 only, which means you received another 30 as a discount. So your total return is 70 divided by 970,000. We know that this was 1 year ago. So 365 divided by 365 will get you your yield rate at 7.216. So just a mere division will get you your yield rate. Okay, that's how this works, in it, how you include both the two segments in it. Question number 2, a 3-month certificate of deposit for 100,000 at 6% matures in 73 days. It is currently trading at 99,000. What is the rate of return of this certificate of deposit? So simply because it's trading in the secondary market, and from the secondary market point of view, you want to know your yield rate. Okay. So simply the discount divided by the amount that you invest will get you the 5.05%. So this is from the point of view from the secondary market alone. If you bought it in the secondary market, now they don't tell that you held it until maturity. Okay. If you're holding until maturity, then you have to include the 6% here as well. Here, only the discount is there. If you're holding until maturity, okay, if you're holding until maturity, you're going to use this 6%, which is 100,000 into 6%. You add down that as well, then you divide by 99. That will be the annualized entire yield until the maturity. But just from the secondary market alone, from the discount, you can get 5.05%. Okay. So with that, we will conclude money market and money market instruments. And now today we will move on to introduction to capital markets. Okay. So this is what we discussed last week. And now we are moving to capital market. So we know money market involves short-term debt securities. So essentially here what you're talking about is debt market. Sorry. So here what you're talking is essentially debt market. Essentially you are referring to debt market. Okay. in the money market, specifically from 0 to 1 year period. But from there on, all what is left here, all what is left here is going to be your capital market. What do you mean? You have your more than 1 year instruments. So there you will have both debt and equity instruments. Why equity? Equity has no specified maturity, therefore they get categorized under the capital market. Notes and bonds, which falls under debt, essentially they have more than 1 year maturity, but they all have a specified maturity. Usually the maximum maturity period is 30 years. If you visit our central bank website, if you visit our central bank website, you can see our maximum tenor that we have gone for is 30 years. So usually it's 30 years, which is the maximum time period for a debt. But no specified time period essentially falls for stocks, which is equity. Okay. Due to longer maturity, capital market instruments experience wider price fluctuations in the secondary market in which they trade than money market instruments. Now, what you need to understand here is longer the tenor. Now, we know money market instruments are of longer term. Okay. So, longer the tenor, which will have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Price of that instrument. What are we talking about? We're talking about price of that instrument is going to fluctuate. It might increase, it might decrease. It will have several fluctuations. Why is it going to fluctuate more than a money market instrument? One major reason is because the maturity period is longer. Because the maturity period is longer, the interest rate, the market interest rate are going to be changing. Now, throughout these 5 years, if the price is increasing, which means the inverse of it is happening in the interest rate. So ideally, interest rate must be going down. So interest rate must be going down, then increasing, then going down. Wait, I'm unable to mirror it. Okay, so here if it's at a peak, it might be at a peak here, trough here, peak here, trough here, again peak, trough, peak, and so on. Okay, so which means when the interest rates are going down, the price has increased. When the interest rate is increasing, price has come down. So depending on the market interest rate fluctuations, the price is going to be very, very fluctuating. Now this is, I'm telling you, on a relationship basis. But for you to practically understand what happens here is, these are debt instruments, right? Or even equity per se. If you have invested in a debt instrument, which is of 5 years maturity, and it agrees to pay you fixed 8%, okay, fixed 8%, and it's a listed debenture, which means you are able to trade it in the stock exchange. But in the market, when the debenture was issued, the market interest rate was around 4%, which means other instruments which came to the market were priced around 4 to 5, 6%. But you got 8, which is very, very lucrative. So the demand for your debenture is very, very high. So when the interest rate was low, when the other instruments got a low interest rate, demand for your instrument, demand for the instrument that you invested in was very, very high because of the high interest. You were at 8% fixed, whereas the market is currently going out at 4 to 5%. Okay. So when people were demanding or willing to buy your debenture, the debenture that you hold, the price of your debenture was going up, which is what highlighted here. But let's say market started to ease up or started catching up, where the interest rate started to increase. Now the market interest rate have gone up, whereas a similar bond has been issued, let's say at 10% interest rate or 12% interest rate. So now the interest rate is essentially increasing. That means now an 8% debenture that you hold is not attractive for anyone. They would rather go and invest in another bond which has 12%. So the demand for your bond is going to drop, which would mean the price in which you could sell your debenture in the market is going to come down, which is what is happening here. Okay, I hope that's clear for you. Capital market participants have very different motivation than those who operate in money markets. Firm and individuals use money markets primarily to invest funds in shorter term of a shorter period. Let's change the color of it. Let's see. They enter to invest fund for shorter term period of time in the money market until a more important need or a productive use for that fund comes. But here, what is their thinking? Is it to invest money just for a short time? No. You're coming to capital markets with the intention of maximizing your wealth. That is going to be your goal as an investor in a capital market. But again, for firms and individuals, here, wealth maximization, but it's not a shorter time. You're now coming here for longer investments. Your investment horizon is going to be for a longer period, not just a short-term parking of funds. Okay, so that's why it differs significantly. Role and significance of capital markets. Why do we have capital markets? Can a country work without a capital market? Let's see what are the benefits of why we have these capital markets. First and foremost, we need to have a capital market to mobilize savings towards investment. The capital market is the market which links the saver to the investor. Now remember, in our very first class, in our very first lesson, we saw, remember the financial system diagram? We had the excess units and we had the deficit units, people who didn't have funds. One of the ways where they can interact is through financial markets. And one such market is, of course, our capital market. Okay, so that is required for you to link up this excess unit with the deficit unit. If not, they are unable to meet, especially because deficit unit holder now has a long-term requirement, long-term investment in hand. Excess unit wants to maximize. Can you maximize wealth for a shorter time? No, you can't, because your tenor is short. Obviously, the return that you get is going to be of short term. But here, on a capital market, you are able to make higher wealth using the capital market instruments. So in a less developed country, if you take less developed countries as a comparison, because they do not have these financial markets with them, because financial market for them is unavailable, what happens is, most of the time, the deficit unit holder is unable to mobilize funds from the excess unit directly. So their way is always through maybe banks, which can be very, very costly for them. For the excess unit holder again, there is no way to earn a higher return or maximize wealth. So what do? They go and invest in real assets. What are real assets? Assets whose value appreciating time, such as land, gold, okay? They can invest in those kind of assets. Or what they can do is, when they have no link up to directly go and invest, the excess unit holder might actually start spending on it. When you spend on it, you don't just normal consumption. You start spending on very luxurious items. Okay? Which is again going to be of no use, or it's never going to be used for a investment purpose. Now, when you use, let's take the same example. Now, if I have 5 million in money in rupee terms, and I want to go to the capital market, but unfortunately our country didn't have a capital market, so I would say, okay, might as well invest in a land. So if there's a land nearby, I will invest my money there. I will buy that land. In 2 years' time, I can sell that land for double the price and get my return. Okay. So by doing that, what happens? I get to maximize my wealth. That's correct. That's happening. But are my savings, my 5 million, the amount that I've invested for the land, is it going towards an investment, a productive investment? No. How do you gauge whether an investment is productive or not? Is the investment creating new goods and services? No. I just bought a land. I'm not putting up a factory in it. I'm not doing any activity in it. Okay? So there is no goods or services created in the economy. Am I giving any employment opportunity to anyone? Am I giving jobs to anyone? No. So if I'm not giving jobs, that's not going to affect the country's employment level. It won't help countries' per capita improvement. Okay. So my act of buying a real estate or real asset is not giving a productive use to the country. Especially gold, you have no use out of it. For a country, what happens is, for an investor, you might actually buy and you get to sell at a higher price. But here what happens, when you're talking about the productive investment side, no goods and services, no employment, no improvement in the income level of the country. Or the other one that they could do is, they start to spend on luxurious items. It's called conspicuous consumption. You have no way to invest your 5 million. So you would say, why am I saving? Might as well buy a luxurious car. So I might, let's say Alfa Romeo, I would import a car for my 5 million, and I will use that for my purpose, my traveling. Because I'm buying that, is the country producing any goods or services? No. Anyone getting employment? No. Any income level of the country increasing? No. I'm just increasing the import of the country, increasing the foreign exchange outflow for the country. I'm simply doing that. But if there is a capital market which earns a good return for those investors, they would mobilize their savings towards that capital market. And that will essentially lead in firms to raise funds and put up factories, expand, set up factories in new countries, launch new products. So those are the ones who will actually benefit a country. So that's one of the major significance or role of a capital market. Next, we have help in capital formation for borrowers and wealth maximization for investors. Now, rather in a money market, it didn't allow capital formation. It allowed fundraising. It allowed you to meet your short-term need, but you had to pay back. Here, what happens? It allows you to form your capital. You can raise equity, which you do not pay back. It's a capital. It's an inflow for your entity. Okay. Even debt, you can borrow for a much longer period through innovative instruments. For an investor, it allows you to maximize your wealth, which did not happen in a money market. It allowed you to earn some kind of a return or reduce your opportunity cost of idle money. But in a capital market, it's going to allow you to maximize your wealth. Productive use of financial resources. Now, when you invest and your investment goes towards capital, towards investment or productive investments, through these capital markets, your money is put to good use. It's going to help to improve the productivity and the economic activity of the country. Okay, therefore, the financial resources of the country are put into a better use. Role and significance of capital markets. Again, we are going to continue, which is going to be the fourth role and significance. Now, what we are going to look at is, now these three are the main important significance of the role it plays. Now, these are more ancillary, I would say. These are inherently available in any kind of market. Okay, now providing liquidity, price discovery, managing risk exposures, lowering transaction cost. Again, these, even the liquidity, risk exposure, and low cost, we even saw that in money markets. But here, it's of a different nature, yes. But these are all more generalistic, more general significance of any financial market. Liquidity. Capital market involves instruments of more than 1 year. But that is going to move. If it's more than 1 year, you don't have to lock in your cash forever and wait until maturity. Capital markets have a secondary market which allows you to trade before maturity and get your instrument converted into cash by quickly converting or at a lower cost. Then you have price discovery and valuation. When you have capital markets, it's going to allow you to discover prices and even value instruments which are of a longer period, which otherwise you were unable to value for, because if it's more than 1 year, there are so many factors to consider. But because you're trading in the market, you can easily determine the price. You can see people are willing to pay this amount of money for a debenture which is of 5 years. So that allows you to discover the price of that instrument. And based on that, you are able to value not only that particular instrument, but any other instrument which has a similar feature. Okay. Then you have helps to manage risk exposures through investments such as derivatives and structured financial products. So these are topics that you are going to learn. After debt capital, we will move into equity, and then you will have derivative and structured financial products. Even those of longer tenure, those are available in the capital market for you to manage your risk exposures. If you want to curtail the risk that you face, you can opt for these products. So again, we saw in money market also, it allowed you to manage your risk exposure. In capital markets, that's going to happen through specific instruments. Okay. Finally, you have lower cost of transaction and information. Lower cost of information, meaning you don't have to spend money to gather information. It's widely available in the market. Information about the buyers and sellers, information about the investors. Even for you to do the transaction, the cost involved is very, very minimal. Okay. Now, who are the participants in a capital market? In a capital market, who are the users of the capital market funds? Who are the suppliers of the security? Those are going to be the same part. Now here, if I'm taking now here, I can talk about the capital market in two senses. Okay, one is from the point of view of funds. Another point of view I could use is security. Okay. So we are going to talk about the capital market in two of these senses. Now from the fund perspective, okay, how is the fund flow determined? Who is going to supply your funds? Who is going to supply the funds? Who is going to demand for the funds? Now, who is going to demand for the funds? It's going to be companies, or let's say companies, government. These are the entities who will need funds. They will say, look here, I need funds. Give me money for investments. Okay. So these are the entities who would essentially request for. Then you might have certain banks coming in, institution, or as a whole, you can convert this as companies and government, or firms as and government. Okay. These two entities are the ones who would need funds. Okay. They require funds, therefore they demand for funds. Now, are these same parties are the ones who are going to demand for the security? No, they are going to be the ones who are going to supply the security. Because they want funds, because they demand for funds, in exchange for the fund, they need to supply security. So it's going to be firms and government who are going to supply the security. Supply the securities to the capital market. That is what I've used here. the main users of the funds, and the suppliers are the companies and the government. Who are the main suppliers of the capital funds? Now here, who is going to supply you your funds? That is going to be financial institutions, again like banks who might want to, institutions, or you might have investors. Now these investors can be retail or can be institutional. These are the ones, these are the entities who will supply you that funds. Okay, you want funds, I will give you money. These same entity are the ones who are going to end up demanding or using the security. On the security wise, the demand for the security is going to now come from the same entity, investors and the financial institutions. So essentially it's the same thing, but a mirror. The exchange is shown. So be careful in your question. You need to understand from what point of view they are asking your question. Okay. So retail investors. Who are retail investors? Investors like you and I, whose quantum of fund is not so significant. We are not an institute who is incorporated specifically for investment activities. We are just there to maximize our wealth. That's our goal. That's why we are here in this market. Okay. But for institutional investors, those are entities who are companies formed with the purpose of investing the pooled funds. They collect deposits from other people and they are to invest those pooled funds and earn a return for their investment. Okay. Now both these two entities can be local or even foreign. You have domestic entities. If you take institutional investors, you have pension funds. You have other money market, like money market funds. You have equity funds. Certain specific global funds are where you have from a foreign party who's coming and investing in shares. So those are the foreign institutional investors. Again, on the retail aspect, you have the local, you and I, investing in the capital market, or even from foreign, the individuals could invest in the market. What you need to know is government. Now here, when we spoke about the government operates in the capital market, but they operate only in the debt capital market. They are unable to operate in the equity market, especially as someone who's demanding for funds through equity issue or supplying equity instruments. They can't be that, because why? They cannot sell their ownership claims. Okay, so they can come in maybe as an investor. Government can invest in securities, but as an issuer, they cannot approach the equity instrument or equity market. However, the company can invest in, or the company can issue in both debt and equity instrument. There is no any restriction for entities. Now we are going to see how these capital market trading happens. There are two ways that capital market trading can happen. One is through primary market. Okay, that is one way. And then you have secondary markets. So what is primary market? We have discussed that in very much detail. It's the new issue market. It's where you have the sale of new securities. An issuer and an investor is meeting in this security. The funds that the investor invests comes to the company, the issuer. Okay, that's the primary market. So here the trade happens between an issuer and an investor. In a primary market, There you can have security issues in following ways. It can be initial public offer, which means, let's say, X company has come to the stock exchange to issue their securities for the very first time. That's the first time X company has come to stock exchange. That's the first time the company is issuing shares for the public. That's the first time the shares that they issue are being publicly available for sale. That's a new share issue. All three are new. Okay. So there, what happens is an initial public offer. Then you have further issue of capital. Again, there what happens is X company, which is already in the Colombo Stock Exchange, they have already issued shares in the market, is now issuing shares to the market again. But the shares that they issue, were not held by him, were not held by anybody else. Those are brand new shares. They are going to be issued again, maybe for the similar price. Okay, but those are additional share issue. Okay, even through that, they could. That's another way that the issue of security can be done in the primary market. Thirdly, you have private placement. Now, private placement is one of the method of even listing in the Colombo Stock Exchange. There, what happens is, now in initial public offer, practically, if the company is going for IPO, they will have to put up a prospectus, which I will show you in a while. They have to make a prospectus. It's a document which has all the company related information. So they have to put that to the public. They have to have forums with the public. They need to have marketing. So the company, so the public is aware that this company is going for a share issue. They are aware about the company. They are aware about the company name. So it's a lot of costs to the company, issuing company especially. Okay. Along with that, the issuing company has certain issues. One is, what if the amount that you put for sale to the public is not subscribed? What if I'm unable to collect the amount of money that I have in my mind? Now, you come to the share issue hoping to collect 100 million. But when you do your IPO, only 50% has got subscribed, which means other 50% of the shares have not been bought, which means you have only collected, let's say it's not oversubscribed, only 50 million, whereas you need 100 million. Okay, those kind of uncertainties are there because until subscription, you don't know what's going to happen. But in a private placement, what are you going to do? You are now going to approach certain investors individually, privately. Especially, who do you approach here? Do you approach retail investors? No. You are going to approach institutional investors. You might approach a pension fund who have adequate of money. Let's say they might have 100 million funds available to invest. So you will talk to them. You will say, look here, I'm going for a share issue. These are the details. So you will give those details on a personalized basis to the company, to the pension fund company. They might have certain questions. You will answer them. And then you will agree. Okay, you will say, okay, can you buy this much of a quantum? The company might actually agree, or the company might say, no, I need some more, or I need less. That quantum is agreed there. So the company they know, okay, this amount will be bought by this investor. They know that for sure. They don't have to go publicly and then understand who bought and who didn't. So in a private placement, they are sure, they can ensure that the subscription of the share is done, and they can ensure that the amount they wanted to be collected can be collected. So if a institutional investor says no, it's okay. They can still approach another one and get their work done. But because it's not public, the others won't be aware of it. So that won't affect the goodwill of the company. Okay. That's why private placement is very much more preferred by many of the entities. And then you have rights issue to the existing shareholder. Rights issue means that's the time you're going to issue new shares, but to the existing shareholder. But here again, the price is going to be lesser than the ongoing market price. Okay. Finally, you have bonus issue, where again you're going to issue new shares to the existing shareholders, but at no cost here, without any cost. You are going to just issue shares. How can a company do that? If the company has a lot of reserves or a lot of cash which they want to convert to equity. They want to convert it to equity. So for them to capitalize, they will issue a bonus issue. Okay. So these are the ways in which they could do a issue of securities in a primary market. Now, why do you need primary markets? What is a primary market? That's where an investor and the issuer is meeting. Do we need a primary market? Can't we only have secondary markets? Let's see why. Now, primary market is important because it is the main market or the first market in which the fund flow towards a productive purpose is happening. Now, it's in a primary market that security is issued, then the money goes to the issuing company. That issuing company can invest in factory, new products and whatnot. That transfer happens only in a primary market. What happens in a secondary market? There, fund flow happens between two investors. I sell, you buy. Okay, so your money comes to me. So I would have sold at a higher price than what I have bought. So it's wealth maximization for me. But for you, you are buying so that you can wealth maximize in the future. Any productive purpose here? No. It's in the primary market that the fund flow happens for a productive purpose. Okay. Secondly, that primary market is important because that's the market which is creating the security for you to trade in the secondary market. If you don't have a primary market, what are you going to trade with in the secondary market? Okay, so that primary market is the market which creates that new issue. Finally, primary markets is going to help for the fundraising. So that's the market for the company and the government to approach to raise their capital in terms of debt for governments, debt and equity for companies. Okay. What are the functions of a primary market? So what happens in a primary market? So there are three functions. One is origination. Then you have underwriting. Then you have distribution. We are now going to look at a real example and see how this is being done. Okay. Now, recently, we don't have any, from recent times, we don't have any share issues, especially during the COVID time or the pandemic time. Very rarely, I don't think any company was advised to come in for a new share issue. Okay. So let's move for one of the companies which did back in, I think, 2017, they did the share issue. It's a Real Property PLC. They were the owners of Bread Talk Chain, Park Street Mews. They are the ones who are managing it. So when you are going to go for a share, now we are going to talk about the primary market share issue. Okay. In a primary market, you still can have a debenture issue as well. Let's see that as well for you. So for now, we are going to look at a share issue in a primary market. So first step is origination. What is origination? It means investigation and analysis and processing of new proposals. Preliminary investigation involves a detailed study of economic, financial, legal, technical aspects to ensure soundness of the project. In the process of origination, the sponsoring institution also performs an advisory role as a second function to improve the quality of capital issues. They provide advice on the below aspect. determination of class of securities to be issued, the price on which it can be issued, the timing and the magnitude on which you can issue, which means at what time are you going to issue it, what quantum are you going to issue, the quantity, what method you should use for listing, what is the technique for promoting this issue. So all these are given as advices. Let's see whether this has been done for one of the share issues. So this is a share issue for this Real Property Limited or PLC now. So what do you mean about sponsoring institution? You have certain institutions who will manage this share issue for the company. They are the ones who will manage, put up, do the calculation, do the analysis, give advices on all those aspects. So these sponsoring institutions are the specialized institutions available. So here you have commercial bank who are lead managers to the issue, and NDB Investment Bank acting as the joint manager to the issue. Okay. So let's see. Let's first see the purpose in which they are offering this share issue. So you can see what is the project for which they are issuing the shares. They are issuing shares for these two purposes: to refurbish one of the buildings that they own and to expand the bread talk outlets. Okay, these two are their purpose. So you can see that is their new proposal, or that's their project. So in origination, the sponsoring institution especially is going to analyze and investigate whether it's viable, whether it's good on all these aspects. So what do? They do a in-detail need analysis. Why do they need? What is the extent of their need? You see, whether the amount that they require is correct, when are they going to complete, all those. Here you have the breakup of the costs given. All these details are clearly analyzed. Here you can see refurbishment is expected to get an NPV of this amount, IRR of this amount. So all these are done. You can see the research report by that institute, or by that sponsoring agency. Okay, so all this is happening by that. Expansion now. Second need was expansion of bread talk outlet. So again, here you can see what are the costs involved in expanding, what is the need, or no, where are they expanding, whether it's lucrative, what is the again NPV levels here. All these are analyzed in detail here. Okay. Especially if you go towards the contents page, you can see they have analyzed about the company, the corporate structure, the capital structure, whether it's highly levered or not, what is the dividend policies, the taxation policies and everything. What are the risk factors involved of this share issue, of the sectors that the company is working, of the business operations of the two entities, the future strategies, everything they have analyzed in detail. Okay. That's what they do here. In addition to that, they are there to advise the company on what kind of a security to issue, what price to issue, what time to enter the market. Now, currently, you see, if I have a company and I want to enter the capital market for a share issue, if I had done that last year this time, or last year April when COVID was at its worst, would anyone subscribe? No. So who would have advised me? My sponsoring institution or my lead managers would have told me, look here, now it's not the time to go for a share issue. For the time being, go for a short-term borrowing. Next year, when the market picks up, we'll go for a share issue. Okay, so those kind of advice, the timing and even the magnitude. They might advise you on saying, okay, let's only go for this quantum. Now you saw the cost breakdown. Now they might have gone for the 100% of the cost amount through a share sale, share issue. Sometimes they would say, look here, going for the entire 100% doesn't look good on you. Why don't you put 50% and let's go for the balance 50% for a share issue. So for those magnitude of the issue, what ways that you could float, whether we could go for a private placement, whether it's IPO, what method to use, and even how to sell these issues. Do we need to put up advertisements? Do we need to have conferences? Do we need to put up forums? All these are done or advised by the sponsoring institution. Now let me show you a real example of it. Now for the same agency, go to these attachments where I will show you how the sponsoring institution has calculated the price. Okay, you can see both of these entities valuation. So they are the ones who have determined the price. So they have carried out a detailed analysis of real and used several valuation methods. Here they have covered 2 valuation methods, and on average of these 2 mechanisms, you end at a share price of 9.78. But thinking of the potential upside, they need to have some kind of improvement for the investors as well. No? They have priced it at 8%. We read the letter. We recommend an offer price of 8% for the purpose of the IPO. It is at a discount. They are expecting the fair value to be of a higher value. So with a discount they are giving so that the people will subscribe more for this issue. Okay. And with that, you can see they have done the entire analysis or the research report in detail. All these, see, the objectives have been identified, read, analyzed in detail. See business description, who are the current shareholders, who are the board of directors, what are the subsidiaries involved, what is the objective of this entire issue. All of this is specified here. Here you can see 960 million they require. Let's see how much was their fund issue amount. They are going for the entire fund issue. They are issuing 120 million shares at 8 rupees each to get the entire amount of the to source their entire requirement from the share issue. So all of these are advised and decided in coerced with in partnership with the managers to the issue. Then you have underwriting. So now all these people have analyzed it, they have decided it, and they might come up to the share issue. Now, if this company is a very well-known company, let's say it's a company like John Keells before it got listed, where everyone knew about the company so well, if that entity is coming for a share issue, then no problem. We know public confidence is high, therefore all the amount will be subscribed. There won't be an under subscription. Now what you need to know here is, here especially the entity is issuing 120 million. Okay, what is perfect subscription is, for the entire 120 they exactly get 120. That means 100% fully subscribed. Okay, oversubscribed meaning it's 120 million that you want to gather, that you want to issue, but the applications have come from investors for 200 million shares. Okay, so many people have applied. All of the application added up together is requesting for, let's say, 240 million shares. which means they have been oversubscribed by 100%. I think one of the only highestly oversubscribed share was Odell. I remember it was 64%, 64 times. I guess I'm not exactly. I can't remember it. I think it was Odell. Because it's one of that news ran as a huge thing. It was, I think, very, very old. So again, here you can see that. Okay. So why this oversubscription is important? Because this oversubscription will act as a positive environment to the company. It will create a goodwill for that entity. Okay. What is the goodwill that it creates? It shows that the investors are so confident about the future of this company. Investors trust this company. That's why they want this share. They're demanding for this share more. Okay, so that's a positive factor that's going to work or improve the image of this company. But if the applications are totaled up and the total of the application comes to 60 million shares only, half of what this company is going to issue, that is called under subscription. Not only 50, even if they subscribe for, let's say, 100 million shares, it's under subscribed. Anything less, now that is going to create a negative impact especially on the good nature of that company. One is, it means that the investors do not know, or they're not interested in the share issue. That's going to affect the secondary market attractiveness for this issue as well, and majorly going to hit on this company's goodwill, which shows that the investors are not confident on this company's causes, not confident on this objective. It can be read at any levels. Okay, so to avoid that risk, if you go for a under subscription, it's a huge risk for that company. To avoid that, usually a new share issue, you onboard someone in an additional party. They are called underwriters. Why do you onboard underwriters? You say you use the service of the underwriter, mentioning, look here, I'm going for 120 million share issue, 8 rupees each. I'm looking to raise 960 million. In case the subscription is undersubscribed, whatever balance, please take it over, buy it, and give me the money. That's what an underwriter does. Underwriter provides you the promise or that guarantee of, look here, I will buy the remaining undersubscribed shares. So you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about your good image. You don't have to worry that the amount that you want is not arrived at. Okay, you can avoid that by using an underwriter. So the benefits to the company is their goodwill is protected. The amount that they wanted to raise, they can raise. Okay. Other one is they can easily, they don't have to worry so much about the public not subscribing, or they don't have to spend so much on maybe on a marketing, on a promotional scheme. For the underwriter, what's the benefit? Underwriter, if the share is fully subscribed, if the issue is fully subscribed, do they have a part to play? No. They don't have to do anything. What they can do is they can simply, they don't have to buy any shares, they can simply charge a commission from that company. Now, if this company has taken an underwriter, they will say, if there is any under subscription, I will buy it. But on the day that they go for the share issue, the very next day when they get the subscription, it's oversubscribed or it's fully subscribed. Okay. Then, does the underwriter have any remaining shares to buy? No. So he doesn't have to buy anything. His services are not required further. But because he gave that guarantee, he is going to charge a commission from you. That's the return for the underwriter. Additional way of getting a return is he can buy this share from the IPO and sell it in the secondary market for a much better price. And again, he can there get a capital gain. Okay, so that capital gain opportunity is available for them. Okay, now that capital gain opportunity is available if the market price is better than the IPO price. But if you take this company, the market price of the company is again the IPO price itself. It has come down, so maybe when it was higher, but maximum it's on a day range. They've not given the 52-week high here. If they have given the 52-week high, we could have seen when the share price was at the highest. Maybe they could have sold off. But if they go for it now, no point. Okay, that you can see. Now, let's see whether I think this entity used underwriter. I think yes, they have used underwriter. Yes, they have entered into underwriting agreement with commercial bank itself. Look here. See the underwriter in the event of an undersubscription, Commercial Bank of Ceylon, the underwriter will subscribe up to maximum of 37.5 million shares. So here, what they have done is they have kept a ceiling. They said, now, usually on a theoretical, we'll say underwriter is willing to subscribe all the undersubscribed shares. But on a practical sense, imagine 100% of it is not subscribed. Can they give you the entire 1 billion? Okay, so what they have done is they have set a ceiling. They have said, look here, I will give you nearly 31.25% of the IPO as a deal, which means out of the 120 million shares that they are going to issue, 37.5 million, they don't have to worry. It's for the balance that they have to worry. Okay. So for this, obviously the entity will charge amount for them as a fee. Okay. And the underwriter profiles are all available. So this they have taken on board as a comfort. If there is anything remaining, commercial bank will come on board and buy these shares. Okay. So final function what you have is distribution. What do you mean by distribution? Now you have analyzed the purpose of it, taken an underwriter. Now you are going to go to the market and announce the share issue. Now for you to do that and for you to approach the investors, who are the frontline staff? Who are the frontliners here? They are the stock brokers or even the dealers. They are the ones who is going to have the direct contact with the investor. Okay. So you might have to initially approach the broker and the dealer, educate them about the share issue. The managers will come on board as well. The joint managers and the lead managers will come in, help you to talk to the investors, talk to the brokers and the dealers, promote the share, tell what are the benefits of it, why you should invest in it. So after you had convinced your broker and the dealer, then you could allow the brokers to approach the investors and then market the share issue. because it's the broker and the dealer who's distributing this message. Okay, so the sale of the security occurs through them, which is essentially what we call the distribution. Now here, if you take in this particular attachment, they have given all the ways in which you could approach. So here, all the application for the IPO. So here there's a separate annexure for collection points. You can collect the prospectus and the application from these three parties, these four parties. These are the authorized brokers available for you to interact with, for you to talk with. Through these people also you could collect your application and your prospectus. So even the distribution channel is entirely mentioned. Now all these are available and all these are mentioned in a prospectus for you. Prospectus is a information. It's something like annual report. It's going to provide all the information you ever need on that IPO. Here you can see it comes in 3 parts. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. It's a huge document. Huge work gets into this share issue. Okay. So that's how the share issue works. Let's check HNB Finance's debenture issue. Again, debenture issue. When they go for a debenture issue first time, it's also a primary market. Remember that. So here you can see the managers to the issue is equity. Different managers to the issue. Here you can see the amount that they're willing to issue. It will be listed in the Colombo Stock Exchange. All these features are jointly or are done in joint with the managers. They also advise the entity on what to do and how to do. Okay. All these are decided with them, and you can see usually they have to see all the objectives of the issue is given. Why are they going for this issue? To strengthen their capital adequacy. Strengthen their capital adequacy and also expand the loan portfolio of the company. That is their objective of it. So this entire objective is analyzed here. You can see just talking on the strength of capital adequacy. What are the regulatory requirements for them? What is the current status for them? And for them to grow their loan book, what is their current growth levels? On what ways are they trying to grow it? Okay. And how are they going to utilize the funds? Everything is mentioned here. So there also the analysis is much more in detail. See, underwriter, the company has not entered into any underwriting because again it's HNB Finance they're talking about, involved with HNB Bank. So again, maybe from the strength, they have assessed that they don't need underwriter, so they're going without underwriter. And again, they must have informed, you can see how they could collect, who are the trading members, the collection points, the distribution channels are available here. Similar to the equity prospectus. All the rating and the declarations are given. All the necessary information are available in the prospectus here. Okay. So that's how the primary market functions work. Finally, we move to secondary market. Secondary market refers to a market where securities are traded after being initially offered to the public in the primary market or listed in the stock exchange. So after you issue it for the very first time, now it's getting traded. Okay, so here the trading happens. The secondary market enables private participants who hold securities to adjust their holdings in response to their changes in their assessment of risk and return. Now, in a secondary market, how this trading works is it's purely based on their own risk and return assessments. Okay. For example, let's say there is a share. I think that company is going to do very well. You think that company is very high in risk. You already hold the share of that company. But because it's of high risk, you want to get it out from your holdings, your portfolio. So what will you do? You will sell that security in the secondary market. And because I think that company is going to do well, I will buy that security. How the stock market and the secondary market works is it's all on opinion and information based. If I feel this is going to happen, I will buy it. If you feel otherwise, you will sell. That's how it works. Okay, so for you to give that flexibility to adjust your portfolio according to your return, according to your risk, it's that secondary market that's helping you. If there was no secondary market, irrespective of whether the risk has increased or risk has decreased, can you get rid of that instrument? No. You might have to hold until maturity. Okay, but because there is this secondary market helping you, you are able to adjust your holdings depending on your assessment. Same thing happens to the return. If I feel this entity is going to perform well and the share price is going to double up, I'm expecting a higher return, I would want to buy that share. But if you already hold that share and you feel the company is not going to do well, company is going to collapse, the share price is going to come down, you will want to exit at that price. Okay, again, according to your return assessment, for you to adjust your portfolio, secondary market is available. You don't have to wait until the issuer comes or wait until maturity. But one of the significant features in secondary market is this margin trading. What is margin trading? Margin trading is buying securities using borrowed money. So simply what happens here is, let's assume I am already an investor. I have a portfolio which is rupees 1 million worth. It's all entire rupees 1 million has been invested in the stock market. It's all in the form of stocks. I don't have anything in cash terms with me. In this time, that particular company is coming for an IPO. And I feel that company is going to do very, very well. And I would want to invest in that company share. But I don't have any cash with me. Okay. No, sorry. Let's assume that company share has been issued and it's available in the secondary market. Okay. So you are going to sell it. You feel the company is of high risk. You're going to sell it. I'm going to buy, but I do have no cash. I will approach my broker. And say, look here, I need to buy 500,000 of that company's share from this. There are some buyers, there are some sellers. I want to buy it from them, but I don't have cash. Will you be able to give me some money? You can have my current portfolio, which is 1 million, and my new purchase of 5 lakhs as the security, and give me that 500,000. So the broker might give me the 500,000 or might give less, depending on the portfolio strength that you already have. And using that money, I will purchase what you're selling. That is called margin trading. Based on your current portfolio and the security that you're going to buy, you can give that as the collateral and borrow money to invest further. Okay, in this example, the security or the portfolio I gave as collateral was 1.5 million. Using that, that broker gave me 500,000. Usually it will be less than 500, it will be around 2 lakhs or maximum 3 lakhs, because it's only 1.5 million worth. Share prices can fluctuate drastically. But let's say I had 150 million worth of a portfolio, broker would have given me like 5 million odd as the margin amount. So that amount depends on your portfolio strength. What is the benefit for the broker out of this? Broker gets interest. I think for a year they charge 24% as the like a TOD interest rate is what they charge on you. So it's around 24%. And using that money, I'm going to purchase shares, right? So when I purchase shares also, from that person, a commission would go to the broker. So the broker is going to get that commission as well. Okay, both the benefits are available for them. What is the benefit to the investor? If it's a market where price is increasing, in a market where price is increasing, if I use that borrowed money and buy the shares today, and in 2 days time share price is very, very high, I can sell off the share and settle my margin very, very quickly. Okay, and from that what happens? It's a very small interest rate I'm paying. I will get a higher capital gain by trading with funds that I don't even have. Okay, so that's the benefit for the investor. All right. Secondary markets are critical to capital markets in following ways, or specifically you can say what is the help or the role secondary market plays in supporting the primary market. Secondary market is going to offer liquidity to the investors. They don't have to hold until maturity. They are able to sell in the market immediately. Again, secondary markets is going to allow you discover the price, especially guiding the primary market to price its new shares. Now, for an entity to price that share, they must have done based on the future cash flows, yes, done several calculations and come at the price. But you can see, even though the I've closed the attachment, even though the calculation showed you around 11 rupees and 9 rupees as the price, they went for 8 rupees. Why? They would have definitely considered the market. What happens in a secondary market? They would have seen, look here, similar shares, companies in the similar business have issued shares like this, and their shares are better subscribed when it's of this much of a discount, when it's in this price that they will buy. Okay, that deciding of the price again is going to be guided by the secondary market activities. In the secondary market, for a similar company share, the price traded is around this price. That is going to help the primary market participants to guide in their pricing. Okay, and thirdly, they have secondary markets promoting savings and investment. Because you have secondary markets available, individuals are encouraged to save and invest in the stock market or in the Colombo Stock Exchange. So they are able to benefit out of it. Okay, so that to grasp the entire benefit, to be a lucrative nature, secondary market is there to promote it. Finally, secondary market is again helping the primary market by keeping the transaction costs very low. Anyone who purchases in the primary market or in the capital market per se, they can easily trade in the secondary market with minimal transaction cost. So that's going to help or support them to quickly convert their instrument into cash. Okay, so with that we can finish off the lesson on introduction to capital markets as well. And let's now get into the introductory bit of the debt capital market and instrument. Now, this is a very, very big chapter and one of the most important lesson in your syllabus. You can see it has 62 slides. Okay, it has all the different calculations, all the different jargons that you dream of. Everything is involved here. But we are going to go through it slowly and learn it clearly, because this is going to determine at least 40 to 30% of your exam marks. Okay. So debt capital market, it's also called as the bond market or the credit market. It is the marketplace where investors can trade government issued and corporate issued debt securities which have a maturity of more than 1 year. Why do government issue bonds? To raise capital to pay their debt or to fund any infrastructural improvements. Why do corporate issue bonds? For their expansion or to maintain their ongoing operations, but it should be of a long-term nature. Okay. Now, debt capital market, because it's a capital market, we can divide it into two segments: primary market, secondary market. What is primary market? Market for new issues, where the transaction happens between the bond issuer and the bond buyer. So here it will be the investors and the issuing company. Fund flow goes to the issuing company. Secondary market, what happens? Already the instrument has been issued. Now it's getting traded in the secondary market. That's what happens in a secondary market. Why do we need to have a debt capital market? Can't we only have equity market? Those are the ways in which you have to think. Okay, can't you just have debt capital, equity capital market? Do you need to have debt capital market? Let's see why. One of the major importance is it's going to help you to mobilize your money, mobilize the savings and allocate towards productive resources. That's one of the generalistic importance of the debt capital market. Secondly, you have the debt capital market is important because government cannot approach any other market. So for the government to finance their development activities, they need to come to the debt capital market. Active and liquid capital market, debt capital market, is going to help in the operation of monetary policy. The treasury bonds, the debentures, all the long-term segments, even the short-term one, everything happens in the debt capital market, the debt market. Okay, so you need to have a debt capital market where the long-term interest rates have to react to the monetary policy, for the monetary policy to seep and trickle down from the short-term bucket to the long-term. And then you need debt capital market for you to manage liquidity, to balance between both your short-term and your long-term objectives. Debt capital markets also provide a great funding avenue to raise long-term funding for both public and private sector projects. Because now you can see 30-year funding. Can you get it from equity? Equity, it has no particular maturity. But here, for that specific project, for that specific tenor, you are able to raise funds without giving the ownership out. Certain projects you can't give ownership out. In that scenario, it's debt capital market which is helping. Okay. Who are the participants in the debt capital market? So, very first participant is the issuer. You need to have the issuer in a debt market, which is a company, a financial institute, government, or even a multilateral agency who's coming in, who's going to sell a security which has a maturity period of more than 1 year. Then you have investors. Investors who can be retail, who can be institutional. So they are coming into the market hoping to maximize their wealth. But mainly in the debt capital market, you find institutional investors. They use such as investment funds, pension funds. Why? Because these are, let's see the tenor of those investments, 30-year, 20-year bonds. Okay, and they are of high quantum. You know, even for treasury bonds, the minimum is 5 million. Okay, so it is the institutional investors who are able to invest in such bulk, or to go for such long-term investments. We understood that especially pension fund and insurance fund, they know the amount of withdrawals that they get every year. So they're able to lock in the funds for a long time. Okay, so mostly in the investor group, you get institutional investors mostly. So that doesn't mean there's no retail. There are retail investors, but mostly it's institutional investors. Then you have managers, who we saw in that example earlier. They are the ones who will arrange, who will structure for you, who might underwrite, who will market and distribute the issue, the debt securities issue. Okay, you will have some additional parties involved called the agent and trustees. What are the agent and trustee doing? Usually these are separate departments in a bank. They are there to protect the interest of the investor. Okay, they're doing the, especially trustee, they are available to protect the interest of the investors, because investors can be so many investors can be there. So to represent all of them as one, you have a trustee bank who will work for the betterment of the investors, and they will overlook whether the debenture payments are done correctly, whether the conditions of the debenture issue are met, and everything. Okay, finally you have the trading infrastructure. These are the entities who is going to provide you that infrastructure system or that platform for you to engage in this transaction. Okay, so these are the 5 participants who are actively involved in the debt capital market. Now, what are the benefits of going for debt financing, and what are the disadvantages of going for a debt financing? Okay, and then we'll move for the debt capital instruments. Now, if the first and foremost, why do we prefer debt over capital? Very first benefit is the tax advantage. You need to know that the interest that you pay for debt is tax deductible. Okay, but the dividends you pay for equity is not tax deductible. Therefore, the company can pay a lesser tax if they can borrow. Am I correct? If I have to show it to you, let's say there are 2 entities. There is one entity who has a profit before tax. Let's say profit from operations of 1,000 rupees. Their finance cost on, let's say, debentures or whatnot is 100. So the profit before tax is 900. Let's say taxation is at 10%. What is the tax amount that they have to pay? They have to only pay 90. So the company ends up with a profit after tax. Profit after tax of let me write it up here so that it's clear for you. You have financial cost, which is 100. Then you end up with 900 as your profit before tax. You need to calculate your tax amount. Let's say it's a very straightforward tax at 10%. So you will arrive at 90. Your profit before tax is 810. Okay, profit before tax. But then you have another entity. That entity profit from operation is also 1,000. But they have not borrowed. They have not given any debenture. They have gone for equity financing. So dividends, do you deduct here? No. So finance cost is nil. Dividends are deducted in the balance sheet. When you put for retained earnings, it's from the PAT. It is from the profit after tax that you deduct the dividend. Okay, so here you don't have any finance cost. So your profit before tax is also going to be 1,000. Profit before tax is also 1,000. Your tax is at 10%. What is your tax amount? 100. Your profit after tax, you are going to end up at 900. Okay. Yes, this entity has a higher profit. Okay. But they are able to reduce their taxes because they have finance cost. Because they have finance cost, rather than the other company, they can pay a lesser tax. Okay, and remember, this finance cost gave them a funding as well. Okay, so that benefit is available for the debt financing. They are able to reduce that tax. Other benefit is predictability and certainty. Principal and the interest payments are already stated ahead. You know how much are you going to pay, when are you going to pay, and the interest amounts. So for the company, it's very easy to forecast their cash flow. They know that the cash flow is certain because they have to pay for it. So that provides a certainty for them. Whereas in equity, you don't know when the company will issue a dividend, when the company will not. It's very unpredictable, uncertain. Okay. Now this, even for a company, it's better. Even for a lender, it's better. Even the lender knows how much he's going to get. Easier planning. The amount of principal and interest to be received and the timing of the receipt is known in advance. These make it easier to budget and make financial plans. Again, goes both ways. For an issuer, it's easier because I know every 6 months I have to pay my interest. So I know when that requirement comes. For a lender also, they know every 6 months I will get the interest. I know in 5 years I will get my principal. So that will allow that entity to plan easily for their requirements. But in equity, you don't know when you will get your dividend. You don't know whether you will actually get a dividend or not. You must have got it last year, but not this year. That uncertainty will damage your planning ability. You can't plan. You don't know whether you need to have more funds or not. Okay. Finally, retain control. Because you go for debt financing, you are able to retain control of the company. You don't give out ownership claims. Okay. You don't give out the ownership of the company. Therefore, the ownership doesn't get diluted. Equity will get diluted. In debt financing, no. The lender has no say in how the company is managed, and the relationship ends once the loan is repaid in full. It's a loan relationship only. They are not the owners of the company. Okay, so those are the advantages of debt financing. But what are the disadvantages of debt financing? You need to have a credit rating. As a person who's trying to get debt financing, you need to have a credit rating in place. That is going to help you. That is going to help you to market that debt financing, debt issue. Let's see whether. So if you go to this debt issue, you would have seen here you have a rating of BBB plus. For this rating, you have to approach a rating agency. You have to wait a little bit of time. They need to rate and give you the correct rating. If it's a bad rating, that's going to affect you. Let's say if it's CCC, which means you are in the junk category. That means it's not sure whether you will pay back or not. So that's going to hamper, or that's going to affect your debt financing. You can't go for your debt financing, or the credit rating agency can cost you more. So those are going to be your disadvantages. Secondly, you might have to provide a collateral. Now, it's not only debentures. For a bank loan even, you might have to issue a collateral for you to get this loan. So that's another disadvantage. Then you have cash flow. What is this cash flow? Taking on too much debt makes the business more likely to have cash flow issues. Sorry, here it has to be S. Adjust it. It has to be S, cash flow issues when meeting loan payments. Now, this disadvantage is there if your company is highly levered. If you have borrowed so much, at a 6 months for you to pay interest, a huge amount you will need. So that is going to affect your cash flow pattern. Okay, so you might have cash flow issues when it comes to repayments. And then finally, fixed payments. You know, here what I mean by fixed payment is the payment cannot be deferred. That's what I mean. Not the amount. What I'm saying is that payment is predetermined and has been fixed. You can never defer it. You can't say, can I not pay interest this year? Can I pay interest next year? Those can't be done. If there's a particular timing, you have to pay in that particular time. If you fail to pay not only the principal, but if you even fail to pay the interest on the correct date, that means it's a credit risk. It can be even due to a technical fault that you didn't pay out, or it can be someone forgot to write the letters, there is a technical issue and your interest didn't go out, but the market is going to read it as this company has some cash flow issue. That's why they didn't pay the interest on the date that they agreed for. So failure to pay interest on time is going to is an indication of the credit risk, and that is going to affect the company goodwill. So you have no leeway, no flexibility. You have to meet that requirement on that day. Okay, so that's a disadvantage when it comes to debt financing. Then you have debt capital market instruments or debt capital instruments. They are generally of two types, bonds and debentures. And here I have differentiated between the bonds and debentures. Now throughout this, let me quickly explain how I have structured this lesson. So first we will look at bonds. We will look at the risks when it comes to bonds, the types of the bonds available, the treasury bond, the sukuk bond, everything. Then you will have debentures, where we talk about what are debentures. So here you have types of bonds, all the types of bonds we talk about. Then you have the risk associated with bonds that we talk about. Then we have the treasury bond that issued by Sri Lanka. Then you have the Sri Lanka development bond that we will talk about. Sovereign bond that we will talk about. Finally, the sukuk or the Islamic bond. What is this bond? How it is different from the other bonds. Then you have debentures. What are the debentures? What are the types of debentures available? What are the advantages and disadvantages of going for a debenture? Okay. Then we move for bond terminology and valuation. So we know what a debt capital market is, who are the participants, what are the types, what are the instruments. Now we are going to know certain terms that they use and how can you value these instruments. So there are certain terms used in the bond market. We are going to see what are those, how to calculate those and everything. Okay, then we move for bond valuation. How can you value a bond? Okay, that is what we will talk about. Then we will go for bond price sensitivity. How sensitive is this bond value? What is affecting this bond value? We know when the interest rate increases, price goes down. We know this inverse relationship. But for certain bonds, it's a very strong relationship. For a certain bonds, it's not so strong. Why is that? Why is it different? Is what we are going to learn about. So that will be the longest part of the lecture. Okay. And with that, we would obviously wind down the bond or the debt market lecture. Why I gave you the entire run through, so you will understand how important this lecture is. Okay. So on Saturday, we will meet again. When we meet again on Saturday, we will start off from the debt capital instrument and we'll try to finish off until debentures. Okay. So thank you so much for listening and we'll meet again on Saturday. Okay.